Ladies and gentlemen watching across the world, we are excited to bring you another edition of The Conversation happening right here at the Kansas Avenue Seventh-day Adventist Church. I am joined today by one of our wonderful members here at church, Sister Karma Duffy. She is my host for today. I just want to read you just a little bit about who she is so that you can know we are joining you today with a wonderful group of individuals who are ready to talk about our students and education. She is married to Marcus Duffy for the last 18 years. They take honor and privilege in raising Jonah, who's age 12, Cyrus, age 10, and little baby Genesis, who is 5. She's an educator for the last 21 years in the San Bernardino Unified School District. Currently, she serves as the principal of the Virtual Academy, which encompasses from TK all the way through 12th grade. She's also a teacher right here at our church. And so I want to welcome her at this time. Karma, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Pastor.
Awesome. Awesome. Good to have you on here. Folks, you are in store for a wonderful program about helping our African American students advance themselves in education. And I want to bring up our guests before you who have joined us on today. First of all, he is none other than Dr. Michael Connor, who is going to be coming up. I'll bring him up presently. There he is, folks. Let me read you just a little bit about who he is. He is, give me a second here, after graduating from Glendale Adventist Academy and attending Loma Linda University and La Sierra Camp at the La Sierra campus, where he received his bachelor's in master's and education. He has worked in the Glendale Academy in 6th grade as an elementary teacher there. And also he became an elementary principal. And then a few years later, the high school principal. After spending several years working in the K through 12 system, he then began working in higher education, taking on responsibilities at the La Sierra University as the director of services learning and Loma Linda University as dean of students for the School of Public Health. After devoting 32 years of service to Adventist education, he has worked he's worked also at Mount San Jacinto Community College as dean of instruction for the last 8 years. He considers himself retired. However, he is certainly an interim associate superintendent of education for Southeastern California Conference. I need to let you know this man does not stop working. He's also served as my son's principal while at La Sierra Academy. And so we're thankful to have him on at this time. I'm going to bring up before you Sister Lauren T. Griggs. Let's bring her in. There she is, ladies and gentlemen. Just wave and say hello to her. She is, give me a second here. I'm going to pull up her information so we can talk intelligently about her. Hold on. Might be having a little bit of issues here, but we're back. She's retired from education in June of 2011 after 41 years of teaching. She has a bachelor's in vocal music education, a master's in administration and leadership. She has taught some pre-K through some adult education and mostly elementary and junior high, which she says is her favorite. She's done lots of high school and homeschool at well, and in the public school and church school. So we thank you and enjoy the presence of having Sister Lauren T. Griggs working with us on today. I'm going to be bringing up Michael Mayne. Let's get him on the stage at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, there he is, Michael Mayne. Man, what an awesome guy. I've seen him around so many times, but I bet you didn't know that he has a bachelor's out of Oakwood University, a master's from the Ohio State University, and he is a father of Malik Mayne and Matei Mayne. I hope I've said that right. He's widower lately from Sister Valerie D. Lake Mayne of 2019. And our hearts do go out to you, sir, as that is, I believe, fresh. He's a full-time professor of mathematics at San Bernardino Valley College and a lecturer at California State University in San Bernardino. Awesome to have you on here, sir. Coming up before us now is Sister Marjorie Robinson, one of individuals I know kind of closely. I've hung out with her just this past Friday night at her school, La Sierra University, where we did First Church last Friday. She is currently serves as the interim vice president of student life at La Sierra University. She has been serving the student body for the past 9 years as the associate vice president of life, student life, and dean of students. Dean Robinson has been working in higher education for the last 17 years. She spent 8 years at Oakwood University in the Division of Student Life, where she developed a fully equipped living learning center in the residence hall. Dean Robinson has been a student advocate constantly engaging in critical problem solving. Her office provides support to students needing financial assistance and connects from their various community and on-campus resources. She serves as Chief Judicial Officer for La Sierra University, ensuring that student remediation procedures are executed with fairness and grace. We definitely need her on our program for today. And finally, coming up, we have Dr. Keisha Holmes. She should be showing up on the screen. Certainly, there she is, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Keisha Holmes. Give me a second to read her information to you. She is, pardon the interruption here. She is the director of Leadership, Innovation, and Outreach for the Riverside County Office of Education, RCOE. Prior to this position, she served as a director, principal, special education teacher, and adjunct faculty member. Dr. Holmes holds a doctorate in educational leadership for social justice from the University of Redlands and a master's in special education and bachelor's in sociology. While she realizes that the current education system encompasses difficulties to be navigated, she believes a central purpose for her life is working on behalf of people, students, parents, and stakeholders most in need of her support. She also is committed to the transformation of not only the education system, but the lives of people from various ethnic, professional, and social backgrounds seeking to lead more purposeful and meaningful lives. Within this pursuit lies her legacy as a wife, mother, mentor, educational leader, teacher, and social justice advocate. Ladies and gentlemen, you have seen our panel. They are here before you at this time. I'm going to ask that we would just welcome them. Those of you who are watching online, want to just give them an opportunity just to say hi. I know that they have. We've got some questions to our panel regarding our education system. We want to know, how can our young people survive, our African-American young students survive in this educational environment we find ourselves in? We're in a time where we realize we don't get the fairest treatment. Even on yesterday, we saw that the sentencing of a police officer who made a mistake, it seemed as if the world itself just gave her an opportunity, a pass. Whereas for Black and brown students, Black and brown individuals, that wouldn't happen. We're starting in our education system, and our first question thrown out to the group is, what was the initial educational experience of the African who became enslaved as people? I want to toss that out there to our panel. Any one of you can jump in with a response.
Well, there was certainly no access to education of any kind, which included the ability to read and write. It was a very difficult time in American history where African Americans did not have the same privileges as white students were, and they were not allowed to get educated. They became very fearful for their lives, for fear that their masters would treat them poorly. So it was not a pretty sight at all.
Well, in addition to that, they also had to learn the language to speak on the fly. We often talk about reading and writing, but no one was teaching them the language either. They had to learn that on their own as well. So from the very inception, we were not able to be educated. So not being able to be educated initially for, a number of years, it certainly put a damper on whatever has come after.
Being educated was a white privilege, and that's important to remember. It was actually a privilege, and it's important that we're talking about the historical context because it certainly affects what's happening today.
And it was a white right as well as a white privilege. We had neither.
And a lot of people don't realize that, but from a spiritual perspective, when the antediluvians were building their tower, pyramid, if you want to call it that, up to the heavens, when God decided to destruct their construct, what he did was confound their communication. So they could not communicate. So what the white man did when African Americans were enslaved and brought here was to confound our communication. If they can't speak, if they can't read, if they can't write, then they can't progress. But as you know, we are resilient in what we do. Amen. And a great example of that is Frederick Douglass, who heard his master scold his wife in front of him. When he was learning, as she was teaching her son, he was by his side learning because he was the toy, so to speak, for his master's son. And as he heard the mother teaching him and she was freely teaching him, he was learning and grasping the education until the father came in and scolded her in front of him and said, "Do not teach him, because if he is educated, then he'll be free. If he gets education, he'll be free." And you saw what happened. That inspired him to learn, and not only to learn, but to become what he did. Imagine if we now took that same onus.
Yes, and I think just to add to that, as we highlight and underscore the illegality of literacy, I think we have to talk about the reason why. And I can't see the names exactly, but I think he hinted at it. And the major component of restricting the ability for enslaved Africans to be educated was to keep them in the form of a slave, and understanding that education was a liberatory tool that would have made them unfit to be a slave, in the words of Frederick Douglass. And so it became about the subjugation and subduing them to reduce their humanity and to also reduce their capacity to become equal. And I think that's very critical.
And also, just one little final piggyback behind her comment. The owners did not want African Americans to certainly get the education, because education meant power. And if they get educated and then they have all of this knowledge, then it would be very difficult for their owners to control them.
Well, also, and they were fearful that their enslaved people would escape if they knew more than the rudiments.
And it still means the same thing.
Right.
Education still means power, right. And it still means that they can escape.
Yeah, right.
Okay. So we dealt with a time where folks aren't able to access education. They weren't able to get to it. What happens when the schools started to get, when we actually started to get in, we started to make our way inside of the schools? What began to change? Or was there a change?
Well, when you think in terms of desegregation, integration, it didn't happen. Plessy versus Ferguson was 1898, and it actually legalized separate but equal. And then almost to the day, 58 years later, Brown versus the Board of Education overturned it. However, And that was in 1954.
54.
And just as an example, Prince Edward County in Virginia actually closed schools for 5 years rather than to deseg, and also used state grant money, tuition grant money, to open schools for white students. So the fact that we had the legal system, quote unquote, on our side did not mean that anything changed. It did not change.
Yes, and to
for
add to
a
that,
long
so
time.
correct. And so to add to that, Brown versus Board of Education was passed in 1954, but schools weren't actually integrated until 1969. So there was a 15-year delay, and there were 2 or 3 other Supreme Court decisions in between that time, Holmes versus Alexander and or Cooper or whoever, and a few different of these where the Supreme Court would say, well, you guys need to do this with all deliberate speed. And one of the conversations that we don't have often enough is that they did incorporate what they called pupil placement laws in between this 15-year period. And essentially what they did is they built the system of tokenism where they would put 1 or 2 black kids into a white school and say, see, we're trying this integration thing, but they would provide them dilapidated materials, inequitable conditions for learning, and to say, see, this isn't a good idea, because if these kids can't thrive, certainly bringing more of them into this environment will not enable them to thrive. And then I also think that it's questionable that we even, and that we might need to spend some more time inquiring into the fact as to whether integration has really occurred. Because even when you look at what took place in 1969, Black kids were uprooted out of their neighborhoods and their homes and put in white schools, but it never happened the other way. In fact, there was a significant white flight. So, and then even if you look at the population and the demographics and the way lines are drawn now, schools are just as segregated now as they were in 1969 and 1970.
And even with that comment, I think one needs to ascertain whether or not those African Americans that are in these quote unquote schools where they are no longer, where they are getting educated, what kind of education are they actually getting? Even though they're there, are they getting the appropriate education so that they can, be able to improve and become educated for society?
And these things are very important because as we don't want the past to repeat itself, number one, and I don't see an appreciable, large scale, overwhelming desire or thrust to cause equitable education for the African American. I think a lot lies with the teacher. Teachers can do an awful lot to offset, but it's almost like one at a time. So we need wide, wholesale change.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of step in here a little bit. So I don't know if you guys heard my bio a little bit. I've been in the education system for about 21 years as an educator, right? I've been in the system a lot longer than that as a student. And so as we think through, how African Americans were part of the system, as you guys just talked, and Ms. Griggs, as you're going through and talking about how we still don't have that overall systematic change, what can we do? What should we do as we think through African Americans in the system now to ensure that they are successful? What can we do? You mentioned teachers. What do we do as a system?
I think one of the things that we can do is to really, first of all, intentionally look at our policies. Many policies that are a part of our system now create barriers for students of color. But it's in the system, and so it feels like this is what we've done. This is what we've always done. Well, unfortunately, what we've always done is not something that is beneficial to Black and other students of color. And so we need to take a look at, intentionally look at our our policies and see how we can make our policies more equitable.
Yeah, need to put better resources in our schools to be able to ascertain what the needs are of those students, and to be approachable and be aware of the challenges that our African American students face. And then lastly, close the gap with some additional support in terms of enhancing the experience of the students.
Well, real change can happen, as I said, individually in the classroom and in individual schools. But real comprehensive change has to start at the top. What do we do at the top? Well, how do we then infuse into top management those things that will really not trickle down? I want it to waterfall down because it's time to actually make change. Certainly, one of the things could be having more people of color, specifically African Americans, in those top positions, and those who are dedicated to making change and who will make the sacrifices, who will take the stands that will cause change to happen.
Yeah, be a committee of one, and go in there and carry out supportive interaction strategies that can be developed within the educational system, and fostering relationship between the school and the home. I think there's a real need to have that be a collaboration between the two entities, and provide some sort of activities and experiences that I think give our children opportunities to learn social, emotional skills so that they can be better prepared in the classroom.
I think I'm going to push back a little bit about the leadership at the top. I don't think we do enough with regard to building leadership at the grassroots. And specifically, I'm talking about with parents. I think if we begin to educate parents on how to navigate the system of education, not from a student perspective, but from the power that they hold in the stakeholder community, I think some of the things that we know students need will take shape. And I think that the lack of advocacy on the part of Black parents is the collective advocacy, shall I say, is one of the reasons why some of the equitable outcomes for Black students don't exist. So when we think about things like the new funding formula in K through 12 education, LCAP, and parents are supposed to participate in that process to inform and to provide insight on the needs of their students. And this is maybe where congregations and the faith community can help, but really helping parents to understand how to get in those spaces and how to advocate for what their kids need. And even with regard to social emotional needs and these kinds of things, the system of education is operating in maintenance mode with the light on, the check engine light on, if you will, and everything, because kids are presenting with some extraordinary mental health challenges, extraordinary social emotional challenges, and many of them originate in the home. And so while I agree that there needs to be support and there needs to be accountability for those in upper management in the field of education, I think it's more conducive for us to enable the kind of change that's going to be sustainable and that is actually going to achieve a positive, high yield outcome for students if the collective is engaged, the entire community, the leadership, parents, students, faith-based communities. We have to come out of our silos and to merge our efforts to really begin to tackle the issues that are presenting themselves as barriers to growth and the development of our students.
What then can we do to engage parents in that way?
So in districts, they have parents. First of all, parents can build their own networks. And that it's one of the things that I work in Riverside County office to help parents do. We call them APACs, African American Parent Advisory Councils. And my role and what we do here in Riverside County is we build parents' ability to understand data, how to read data, what it actually means, in terms of what it's communicating about their students' learning, their students' social emotional status, etc. But then how they formulate questions and conversations with educational stakeholders to make movement and to make changes. Additionally, the kind of questions that they need to ask their children when they come home about the quality of their experience. I read a study, it probably was about 7 years ago, but it said that the majority of parents spend 15 minutes FaceTime a week with their children. 15 minutes. Let that sink in. And so the kind of dialogue that would generate the information that's needed for the advocacy and for those things to take place, we have to begin to teach people that, whether it's in churches, whether we have parent groups come in the evening hours or in the morning hours, or we have virtual meetings, we have to begin to inform their conscientiousness about things that may not be so present given all the demands and all of the things that people are trying to weigh, especially in the midst of a worldwide crisis.
Yeah, I was glad to hear you speak of the importance of data. I think that's extremely important to gathering adequate information in order to strategize and set direction, and then to hold our educators accountable. I think oftentimes there is a lack of accountability within the system where we do not take certain initiatives to make sure that our African American students are actually being educated.
I just want to say, I think we can work from both angles, and that is working with the parents. I think that's awesome. But I think it's also important too, when it comes to accountability of the leaders of the institutions where these students are going, because there has to be an intentionality on the part of the administrators and leaders to first recognize the issues with the BIPOC community, and then to make changes that are going to positively affect our students, especially in higher education. So yes, definitely we should work with the parents, but we should also, on the other end, have our administrators be responsible to understand and see what the issues are and to make changes that will help our students be successful.
I want to ask this question
I
of
totally
the group.
agree with that.
I want to ask this question real quick. So on our panel right now, we have a number of you who have been and are still involved in, so to speak, higher education in terms of, universities or in the city and things of that nature. Is there a difficulty in making sure that there are other folks who look like you in offices near and around you? Like, is it difficult to bring up other Black professional educators?
I have a mixed opinion about that. It depends on, so one of the concepts that we are dealing with in education is this notion of whiteness, and how whiteness shows up and creates disadvantage, barriers and obstacles to the success of not just students, but African American professionals. And sometimes it's the case where we have African American professionals in positions that are operating from whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really understand, or maybe they do, but they're not advocating and they're not posturing themselves on the side of what African American people need to thrive. And so they become pawns to a system and become culpable to the same harm and what I call a hostile democracy that our students and Black professionals are facing in this very broken and maintenance mode education system that we have. And so to more pointedly answer your question, if they are conscientious and acquainted with what it means to be African-centered and to advocate for the needs of African American students and staff, then yes. But for the ones of them who are not, I would definitely not recommend it, because they become they become what stands in the way of the change that we've all just discussed is necessary.
That's very powerful. Sometimes we get leadership in position for political reasons of their own gain, and not for the necessity of building that relationship and rapport with our African American students.
Right, and that was why I said that they would have to be dedicated, willing to make the sacrifices necessary to get the job done. Oftentimes, we move up and we forget what's happening below us. Not in terms of hierarchy, but if we're in managerial positions or in schools or in boards of education or in educational districts, we cannot assimilate. We can acculturate, but then we kind of do that anyway. But we must not assimilate. We must still stand by whatever it is that we know to be true in terms of furthering the educational experiences of our children and young adults.
I appreciate that thought too. I think it is imperative, though, that we have people of color in, hopefully, that if they are in the positions that they have the opportunity, that they will advocate for the Black and students and students of color. That advocacy is important. It's important for the student to see them there. The mentorship is important. And so hopefully, for people that make it to those levels, that they really are concerned about the students and keep the students' well-being in their focus. That's so important. And I think that we should intentionally look for people who represent us. We should intentionally look for them in those positions. And even though, sometimes you hear the argument, well, we don't have this type of professor, or we don't have that type of professor, or, but if we were intentional about going to the places where you can find them, like some of our HBCUs, and nurturing them and helping them to understand the reason for maybe helping them to pay their way through school, right? So that we can have them in places where they will help to bring up the next generation.
I think it's very key that our African American students at a very young age, elementary on up, see African American models to mentor behind, because they are certainly seeing a lot of the other. There needs to be a balance that would support to that student that would say, hey, I know someone, I'd like to be like that person who is an African American.
I think I'd like to go in a little different direction. And that is that there is not a resiliency like there used to be in the African American community. I will say, with the exception of a few people on this panel, that many of us remember James Brown had a song back in the day, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. And we were proud of being Black. And it carried with it a certain resilience. Our forefathers made it and didn't have that example to look at. They had no one ahead of them that had done it before them, but they blazed a trail because it was their right and because they knew it was important to them. We have fought so hard to create paths and channels and the right environment for our students to succeed, but they need to have a resiliency. In answer to the question that was asked at the beginning, we need to teach our children. And it starts with a committee of one, because I know I went at my sons about education, and they go after their friends and they talk about, it wasn't a question of if my sons were going to go to college or not. It was where they were going to go to college. And it wasn't a matter of if education was important or not. And not just because dad's an educator, but because dad said to them, look, you have to have a plan. And this is the start of your plan. You may not use this, but it is a tool in your toolbox that I want you to have that other people don't have. You will have it though. And you will have the opportunity to use it, because you can't wait until you need it to learn it. You have to be equipped before the time comes so you can step into your destiny. Okay, I'm not trying to sound like Pastor Morris, but I want you to understand you have to be focused. And although we are talking about things that would make it better, part of the problem is we are not resilient like we once used to be. And we don't have the desire to achieve like we once used to have. And we need to start by instilling within people that desire. I have sat with many a young man after class who was telling me that they were struggling because, everybody struggles with math. At least that's the phrase that people use to say, I don't want to put forth the effort. And I said to him, I said, look, if you want to be successful, then you have to decide you want to conquer this. If you don't decide you want to conquer it, you won't. But if you decide you can do this just like other people have done it, you will make up in your mind that you're going to spend the time, you're going to spend the energy, you're going to dedicate yourself to your success. I said, then you're going to learn something about you. You are going to learn that you can do whatever you put your mind to. I said, that's up to you. I said, I can show you as much as I can do, I'll do. I said, but I can't work harder than you work. If I'm working harder than you working, something's wrong.
Yeah, I think, Michael, every parent and every teacher needs to help our students with self-efficacy. Give them the ability to be successful and have the capacity to learn. And they need to understand the importance and have a sense of belonging. We need to share with our African American students that they do have the aptitude, that they can succeed, and that they do have a sense of belonging within our community. And that can start with parents, just like you were mentioning, but not only with parents, but I think even with teachers as well.
Well, I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I think there is that resiliency and that thrust to better ourselves has been lost in parents as well. And I think that in some areas that I have been in, getting parents to participate in the educational process of their children is worse than pulling teeth. I was in a school, this was many years ago, but I was in a school in the inner city, and we had to finally stop having PTA meetings because it became another faculty meeting because the parents did not show up. And so I don't know that is going on now. I know that there is a disconnection between parents and the education of their children. They will fight for them in ways, but not necessarily the ways that are most conducive to their learning. And so somehow there has to be I won't say committee because committees don't necessarily get the job done, but that was parents. Yes, parents are essential. I have had the experience in my own classroom of bringing parents and children together through what I did, which I was just led to do those things. And I've seen it happen in other classrooms, but again, that's on a very small scale. So what is it that we can do to spark the parents? Because for instance, you send them home with new math and the parents couldn't help them with old math. So they can't help them with new math and they feel reticent. I told my parents, just sit with them. Just don't try to do the math. Just sit with them and let them know that you're there as support. and that you care. Yeah. So I think, yeah, a lot has to do with parenting, but I think that parenting, for us to get those parents out and to engage them, we have to, again, there are sacrifices that have to be made. There are time things that we got to do, stay after school, call parents on the phone, whatever, we can do in our little spheres. But also we need people in principal positions and in superintendent positions who will fight for that as well, who will develop programs, who teachers who will develop programs and take them to the management, to bring parents in and let them know that they are an integral part of their children's success.
I want to piggyback on that, because that is something that's very important. And in this setting here, we need to recognize that this is where the church can come in remarkably. I also worked as an administrator at a school, and I didn't have in my bio, this is my 39th year of teaching. So, I mean, I've been through it and I understand the process, that there are many parents who can't help. I had one parent tell me when I called her in, I was telling her about her child. She was like, listen, I work 3 jobs.
That's what I was about
She
to
said,
say.
it's all I can do to get their clothes ready and get food for them in order for them to eat so that they can go to school the next day. I don't have time to do that. So understanding that there is a disconnect with the family, and you could talk about single parents, you could talk about children raising children. I mean, you could just approach it from so many different vantage points, especially with respect to the Black community. But the ideology is that the church can be a resource for parents. Imagine if the church is a place where your kids can come to school and learn and get help. Do you think parents would want their kids to come to church? And I will say Kansas has been a trailblazer with respect to education and helping prepare the children with SAT training and other training that they have that you guys have provided for the school. So for the community. But we need to, how do you reach parents?
Yeah,
Because
I think
the parents don't come.
I think it's important to underscore the point that the brother just made about the grit of African American people have changed. And so he talked about them not really having an example, but they blazed these trails, but they also worked in community, where if somebody's mom was working, the neighbor was taken care of and following up with the kids. And we had this sense of community and extended family that doesn't exist in the same way that it has before. And the challenge that presents is many kids are latchkey, and then to the point that you're making, Pastor, we need churches to take on a different characteristic in the community and in the family than maybe what's happened, or that maybe than what's been traditional for our time. And so setting up tutoring or, whatever kinds of things need to happen in the absence of parents, not because of negligence per se, but just because they're taking care of all of the other features of maintaining and keeping the solvency of a family. Some schools have after school programs and these kinds of things. The problem with those programs is that they're limited to students who fall under a certain income threshold. And so for students who still need that mentoring, they still need that support, they still need people around, they get left out of those kinds of supports. And churches could be eligible for some of those grant funds and federal funds to run programs within the congregational capacity to fill in some of those gaps. And so I think it's going to require more collaboration than I think what exists across domains. I watched this video of this young guy, and he says that the superintendent saying it's the principal's fault. The principal saying that it's the teacher's fault. The teacher saying that it's the student's fault. The student saying it's my parents' fault. But he said, at the end of the day, I still can't read. So regardless of whose fault it is, it doesn't change the reality. And we have to think how we actually change the reality. So how do we engage the superintendent, the principal, the teacher, and everybody and say, let's troubleshoot this, because collectively we can manage this. There's enough ingenuity between us, right? But the problem is we're just pointing fingers. And then in that way, absolving ourselves of the individual and collective responsibility we have to address the problem. So I don't have kids in K through 12 school anymore. My kids are in college. But I still meet with parents and say, here is what you need to know. Here is what you need to do. Here is how you follow up. And here is how you organize. Another thing that I want to bring to your attention that you might not be aware of is the same hostility that students are experiencing, African-American educators are experiencing too,
Yes.
especially administrators. So you can't go in and say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. They will have you out of there quicker than you could blink, right? And so this is another space where we need the power of the African-American family and the community. Because African-American administrators are so far and few between, it's easy for them to be picked off. The moment a teacher doesn't like that they stood up for a Black kid or whatever, they're done. They do a vote of no confidence, they're not going to be there much longer. And so if we can't help to sustain people in these positions to make the changes and to safeguard and act as guardians over our children, the best that we can do is to have incremental and supplemental like pockets of success, but nothing that will take the shape and form that we need to really mitigate this problem. And so we almost have to have, and I like what she said about not these committees, but we need to be able to convene and to do a root cause analysis of what are the major issues affecting the kids in our region, our particular demographic, and from every angle of analysis, what does the circumstance require? It's sort of like doing an autopsy of the situation and then saying this is how we need to re-engage from every respective role.
It sounds like we need to have advocates in certain areas in terms of pulling all of these things together. Mm-hmm. We mentioned the church. The church certainly, other than having some tutorial sessions, can certainly be an emotional opportunity for them to help our students and our parents emotionally to be able to deal with society and all of these challenges that we're talking about. It is a collective effort. It isn't just one person's job or responsibility. It's all of us together.
I've got a few bones to pick here because I feel beat up on, pastor of the church. I'm feeling like as if the whole weight, the yoke is on my shoulders. I will have to say, first of all, Mike, Mayne, that is, we all remember, the song from our good doctor and reverend. Well, he wasn't a reverend, but, say, I was wondering, who's he talking to when he said,
I was wondering the same thing, actually, because I know the song.
I think I know that song. But nonetheless, let's
just say y'all look young.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
So we're talking about the problems that are there, and we definitely see them. And many of us, those of you who are in education, you definitely see them. But when we look at this panel is all Black. And this panel, thanks be to God, all have second and tertiary degrees, So what's working? Talk about people who have mentored you and helped you get to where you are, and how that could help, other children when they see mentors.
I don't think I can accurately speak to that because because of my age. It was a different time, and parents were engaged. I didn't have a sit down and do Lauren's homework with Lauren because Lauren always came home and did her homework. So I didn't, and I wasn't, I was from, I lived in the ghetto, but we were middle class. You know how that is. You know how we do. Or I don't even know what class we were in, but whatever. That's not even important. What's important is that if you got in trouble at school, on your way home, neighbors were saying to you, I know what happened. Come on in here, girl. And I'm going to get to you. Your mama's not home. She's at work. Your dad's at work. I'm going to deal with you right now. And then I'm going to tell them what happened. Well, by the time I got home, truthfully, I think it happened to me one time. It didn't have to happen more than once, Kay. I was not going to have that happen more than once. But the fact is, everyone, the whole "it takes a village to raise children," that's really not a cliche. And when I was coming up, a village did raise the children, and so, but also parents did. And back to the point of what we need to do in terms of engaging parents and whatever, that takes sacrifice. You're not going to stay after school and call parents and meet with parents and go to parents' homes or whatever you need to feel you need to do in order to, as an administrator, as a teacher, whatever. It takes sacrifice. It takes knowing what you need to do or what needs to be done and doing it. And that takes time away from your own family. So there are a whole lot of demographic issues that everyone has to work through. But I think that if we had, of course, kids didn't appreciate the whole neighborhood knowing their business, but if we had more engagement of, if people cared more about the furtherance, the successes of children and young people, I think that we have become a more, I don't know, I won't say narcissistic because that's clinical, but more self-centered, self-absorbed society. And so, I got mine, you got yours to get kind of thing. And we need to first divest people of that. And that becomes individual to individual, actually. Individual to individual, it's like the word of mouth is the best advertisement. Well, and that can, I'm not talking individuals like just teachers. I'm talking the superintendent is meeting with a parent, or is meeting with another superintendent, or is meeting with another with principals or whatever. There has to be that sense of purpose and sense of focus on what really is going to make the change and what really is going to get to the root of the problem and what really is going to hit our kids where they live, as the saying, that's probably in my day, right? But where they can recognize and realize that people love them. They're not just teaching them, they love them and they want for their success. That I heard a teacher say, you know what, I'm gonna get my paycheck whether little Johnny learns how to read or not. This is a Black teacher, and this was many years ago. So that attitude has no place has no place anywhere, but it certainly has no place in the educational system. But we as a people, as the adult people who are bringing up these children, have to have the focus and have to have the sense of sacrifice and have to be willing to do what is necessary, not to neglect our own, because the pebble in the water, the ripples start at the pebble. So we want to start there, but we also want to teach our own children that there is a work for them to do in that regard. And if we do that, person to person to person to person and person to group, and eventually it will happen. But the sense of sacrifice, the resiliency, all that we used to have, we need to get back. And it's not gone. It is buried. We need to dig it up.
So, Pastor, I know you said you felt a little bit beat up, but wherever your congregants go to school, their superintendents need to know you by a first name basis. Mm. And you should be having meetings with him on a regular to talk about the conditions that face your constituents. There's a quote that says that the health of any civilization can be determined based on the health of its children. Mm-hmm. Right?
Health of its, you broke up.
It says that the health of any civilization can be determined by the health of its children. And when we look at these indicators surrounding African-American students, to say they're daunting is an understatement. Mm-hmm. And then James Baldwin says that we cannot be upset when the bread that we cast upon the water returns to us poison. But that's the only thing that can come to bear when we see it as somebody else's responsibility to take care of our children. Chinese people send their kids to Chinese school at the end of the school day. Jewish people send their kids to Jewish school at the end of the day. Our children don't have anywhere to go to learn about themselves outside of the K through 12 experience. But we do have parents who will say, you're not teaching my kids Black history. And then Malcolm X said only a fool would trust this kind of system to teach their children. And so there's something that we have to absorb as people and to recognize our culpability to what's happening. inclusive educators, clergy, whoever, all of us. And we have to become on one accord and begin to engage in these conversations about what we haven't done that we need to start to do to revitalize the sense of villageness that we know our students need. Now, research tells us that African American, some Latino or Latinx populations thrive. We don't do well in self-directed learning atmospheres. We do very well in community-based where people are working together. Well, we're more silos, and this hasn't happened just because of COVID. Mother brought this up just a little bit while ago, where, you know, there's no sense of community where the neighbor can say something to somebody's kid without it being a brawl at the end of the day or on the block. And until we can begin to say we're collectively responsible for what's happening to our kids, and let's set some norms of how we're going to address the issues that are happening, it's going to be very difficult for us to begin to turn this tide a different direction.
Yeah, going back again to this idea of advocacy and being a committee of one for the support of our students about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need to make sure, Pastor, you were asking what our group can do and what you can do. Yes, I think we need to hold our leadership accountable in certain areas, because our students may not have the voice that we do. But I believe that if there are individuals within a village who will go to, whether it's the superintendent or the administrator, and to begin to share the concerns of what we are seeing. And I don't know which one of the panelists mentioned this, but the data speaks loud. I mean, it's there. Black and white, it is there. And if our schools are not addressing what's in that data and setting up strategies and goals for implementation of new direction, then they need to be held accountable.
Mm-hmm. So only thing I was going to say too, Pastor, the thing is, when we say what we can do, I think we need to look at mentoring a little bit differently too. And we need to start being the mentors, because the assumption is that these predominantly white administrators and teachers know how to rightly apply what our kids need, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So they need to be mentored by us as Black educators, as Black community members, because they don't have the cultural competence that they need. And they try. I don't know if you guys saw what happened in Riverside Unified a couple months ago, where the teacher is making fun of Native American people in the name of trying to teach math. I mean, really, she thought that was a strategy. You know, and then we have the teacher who was just last week put on leave because she read a poem that had the N-word in it and she said the word. And so we have to teach them the culture and how to engage the culture, because they don't know. And there's nothing in the teacher preparation programs or the administration preparation programs that prepares them to deal with the diversity that our students need. So it's incumbent upon us.
I want to ask my co-host if she has anything to say before I wrap this up. I know her years in education may yield some information that she wants to share with us today, but if not, you know, I'll continue, but I'll give you a little bit of time before we close up. We're almost at our mark.
Yeah, I was just going to say pretty much the same thing. The data speaks for itself, right? And so as educators, all of us are educators, and we have our kids and their friends who we really take under our wing. But again, what is it that we do with our students that we serve and our educators that we actually are, you know, we supervise them. I think it's been a great afternoon. I've learned a lot from all of you guys. You guys are definitely a distinguished panel, and my mere years of 21 years in education are minimal compared to what's here. And it's just great learning. I see Mr. Mayne, you have one thing.
You're muted, Doc. You're muted.
Michael.
I'm sorry. I was going to say I was trying to give Dr. Robinson a chance to get hers in, because I didn't want to monopolize. But there's still things that you guys said. You asked a question: what helped us? And I grew up in a time when everybody in the church tried to help you, push you forward. And this is something that we don't see. I don't know if you know, but studies have shown that after a foreigner has been in an area long enough, the second generation generally starts to inculcate with the culture that is around them instead of the family culture. And so we as Black people have become what society has purported. It's kind of like when Jesus is talking about the Laodicean church and talking about them being lukewarm. Lukewarm means that you are the temperature of your surroundings. And that's what we have done. We have acculturated to that temperature. In that, we have fragmented ourselves like they do. And as we have become more financially solvent and we have become independent, we start to push that aside with respect to our culture. I grew up in a time when in the church, you didn't walk past an older man without giving him respect, without paying dues to him. You know, they would pull you aside and say, "How you doing, young man?" And you had to engage them and talk to them. And they would ask you, "How you doing in school?" And they felt responsible to help push you towards the goal that helped all of us, and not just you, but you and the generations that come after you. That networking started in church. Now, it should have been in home also, but I just want you to know in this church setting that we're talking in, you know, because we do it in our schools, and I can promise you that everybody on this panel has sacrificed time and energy to help inspire those people that we see around us that look like us, and pulled students aside and said, "Man, you," and this is what Black colleges did and what happened in Reconstruction. Black colleges and historically Black colleges said, "Look, you have a responsibility to all of us to succeed, because when you succeed, we all succeed." I had an older Black woman tell me when I was teaching, she said, "You need to go back and get a graduate degree." And I was tired of school. I was burned out. And I was like, and I tried to be respectful when I asked her, I was like, "Why should I do that?" And she said, "Because you can. Everybody can't, but you can. So we need people like you who can to do it, to give inspiration to the ones who can't." And I felt a burden on my shoulders that realized we have to help one another.
I don't know if Sister Robinson, if you want to say, Marjorie, if you want to say anything in the last few minutes that we have here, but I'll yield some time to you.
Sure. You asked about mentorship, and I wanted to say my parents, who did not have a high school education, were my mentors. They sent me off to college to do better, right? With all the support that they could, all the love that they could. And so I was a first gen in college trying to figure out, you know, how to get resources, how to find my way. And so they were my mentors. And I just want to say that here at La Sierra University, my intention is to be mentor for students of color who are trying to find their way, who are dealing with the financial barriers and the programming barriers and all the different barriers that they're dealing with. But I thank God for my parents as mentors. And also, I'm thankful for my they're not kids, but my adult kids, who also at this point in my life are my mentors, as they now are taking on what they're teaching their children and how they're bringing them up. And I really appreciated, last point, Dr. Kai, your discussion about how the churches can be involved, because I would love to see that we have times when we're talking to the parents about what to expect in college or what their students should expect in college, and help them through that process. I think that is so, so important. And I thank you for having the opportunity to come today and to just be a part of this really, really important conversation.
Could I just add one more thing?
You got like 30 seconds.
It's not long. Does anyone disagree that there is a place for trade schools?
There is a place.
Absolutely.
We can't get into it, but not everyone can go to college for any number of reasons.
Correct.
And my father was high school educated, but he was a master plumber who was not acknowledged as a master plumber because he was Black, but be that as it may. he didn't go to trade school either. It was apprentice. Again, I'm old, so. But we must acknowledge too. I love learning. I love college. I might go back and get a PhD for no reason. But not everyone is like that, and not everyone can go to college. So we have to leave room for those skilled craftsmen. We don't even call them anymore. We call them skilled laborers. But if you can build a cabinet,
you're a craftsman.
You're a craftsman. So I just wanted to throw in trade schools or the like apprenticeships or whatever.
Well, we're all on this real quick. We are all educated, but when the plumbing goes bad, who do we call?
Not one of us.
No.
Listen, ladies and gentlemen watching online, we appreciate all of you for coming in and hanging out with us. There are many of you who made comments in our comments and just enjoyed watching our program. We appreciate you. We want to say a quick thank you to Sister Adrienne Blayton. I'm put up her comment that she put at the bottom here. She says, thank you for the insight. This is food for thought and provides insight on some of the things our education committee can focus on. Let me just act this out. The church took some hits on the ropes today. Yes, we did. But I'm happy that I'm a part of a church that values education. Hence the reason we're having this conversation and the one we had last week, where we're trying to make sure not just our students, but our parents understand how they can advocate for their children, and our children understand some of the resources and mentors that you have available to you. We started this program kind of talking about how we weren't integrated and how they did not want us to have, they meaning the powers that be, our white masters, if we want to call them that they did not want us to be educated because they knew that if we were, that we would be free. And then we kind of shined the light on the fact that we're still not educated, and that means we're still not free. Now, listen, we want you to know and understand that there is nothing that you cannot do if you put your mind to it. That's right. Michael Mayne came on and made sure that he helps his boys understand that. And you need to make sure that you understand that. Whoever you are watching out there, there's nothing that you cannot do, especially if you put your mind to it. If you watched our worship service today, even our preacher, guest speaker, Dr. Andrea King, came in and said some of those things as well. You've watched a panel full of Black educators who have overcome many different things and on a regular basis continue to make sacrifices so that you and I can not just see them in their wonderful offices and with their professions doing the great things that they can do, but also feel like it's possible for us to overcome as well. We want to thank you for joining in today. We want to say a special thank you to our panelists, those of you working on the grounds where the rubber meets the roads for education and making sure that Black and brown students can get an opportunity to get up. I can't leave without saying this one thing. Listen, if you're an educator out there, if you're a teacher, if you're someone who knows that what's inside of you, God has placed in you a burden, a dream to be an advocate for us, your own people, listen, reach out to some of these people here on our panel. Reach out to our church. We want to make sure to help you get in the right positions so that you can continue to shine in your gift and talent that God has given you. Once again, thanks again to our education department and to our church for making sure that this stuff happens. We've got more work to do, folks, because we still have other students who need to know that they too can make it. Thank you for joining us. I want to say thank you again to my co-host. I want to call her Dr. Karma Duffy, but Principal Duffy, thank you again for joining in. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the rest of your evening. We appreciate you. Thank you for coming on. Our closeout music will come on in just a minute. You have a great evening.